Now, Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi.
Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel had high praise for local military contractors when he came to visit Rhode Island earlier this month.
Today, southeastern New England has become the Silicon Valley of undersea warfare. It's not only that our submarines are built here, it's that their critical underlying technology, capabilities, and future operational concepts are developed here as well.
There's no doubt the defense industry has become a key engine of the Rhode Island economy, but the sector is also facing challenges in a time of tighter federal budgets. This week on the first half of Executive Suite, the executive director of the Southeastern New England Defense Industry Alliance, Donohue Magee. Then, you may not think of rustic Burrillville as a hive of commerce, but it's home sweet home for a family-owned clothing company that's now tripling the size of its facility to meet demand. On the second half of Executive Suite, the president of Alashan Cashmere Co, Donald Fox. Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi, and I hope all of you are recovered from primary election return watching. I'm not quite there yet myself, but we'll try to get through anyway. But I'm really excited about the conversations we're going to have today, and I think it's going to be a really interesting show. And Molly, first, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start off, people heard there at the top, high praise from Chuck Hagel, which was interesting to have him here, and we're going to talk about that. But before we even get to the role of the defense industry in Rhode Island, let's do a definition for folks. When we say defense sector, defense industry, what do we actually mean? Who are we talking about? What companies, what organizations?
When we say defense sector, there are really two main pieces to it. One is the military infrastructure, and that includes places like the Naval War College, the Naval Undersea Warfare Center, the National Guard, the Coast Guard. And then there's another piece of it, which is the industry piece, and that is industries from both large industries such as Electric Boat and Raytheon to very small industries that have, just a couple of people, but that are doing really high-tech, innovative work.
So it's both inside the services as well as the many private sector firms that help the services do their mission?
Absolutely.
Okay, so political leaders, especially in a campaign season, talk a lot about the importance of the defense industry to Rhode Island's economy overall. Can you put any numbers on that, any data, give people a sense of how big is it? How much a part of the economy in Rhode Island is defense at this point, and in southern New England?
We can, and the General Assembly, through the Defense Economy Planning Commission, commissioned a report on the economic impact of the Rhode Island defense sector. And it came out in June, so we have really good statistics. $4 billion, just a little bit under that, economic impact to the state. That's fairly significant. Break it down, just a little bit under $2 billion that goes to household incomes. And that's both direct and indirect. 33,000 workers, pretty significant, about 6.2% of the workforce. Of that workforce, a piece of information that came out that we all knew was important but now can really quantify. The defense sector is the highest wage-paying sector in the state.
Really?
So for a civilian defense worker, a worker who works for the government, their average salary is $95,000 a year. For an industry person in defense, it's $73,000 a year. So high-tech, innovative workforce. And again, that spurs a lot of induced and indirect economic benefit back into the economy.
I'm very impressed you have those numbers off the top of your head. You know them well. What part of the defense sector is big around here? Is it people working on the Navy base, right, for the Navy, that kind of thing, or is it people at Raytheon, Electric Boat, stuff like that?
Certainly, Electric Boat is a major impact in the state with the building of submarines and submarine systems. Raytheon is another big player. The other big player is the Naval Undersea Warfare Center. Down in Newport, it's the research...
Newark, right?
Newark.
I always get it a little wrong, yeah.
Full disclosure, I retired from there a few years ago as their chief financial officer.
Yeah, Newark's an interesting thing. Tell people a little about that. People might not realize it's quite a cool place down there.
It is a very cool place. They have just under 2,600 government workers who work there. It's $1 billion, just a little bit under $1 billion organization. Half of their money gets contracted out, and that's why you see a lot of industry that supports that. They are the repository for undersea warfare research and development. Very important, nationally recognized, and very significant to the state.
Do you think there's an awareness? You mentioned that commission that the General Assembly put together, and I have, as I said, heard a lot of discussion about this year. But do you think there's a general sense, Rhode Island, that knows its manufacturing history so well? Do you think there's a full understanding of the defense sector's size here at this point?
I think it's growing, and that's one of the reasons we thought that report was so important to get out, so that we really could start publicizing it. You know, way back when I worked at Newark many years ago, submarines were called the silent service. And so it was sort of silent what we did, and it wasn't publicized a lot. And I think that in a way did a disservice for how important it was to Rhode Island. Certainly when we came to the era of BRAC, base realignment and closures.
Which was base closing is always very controversial.
Correct.
About where the bases get closed.
In fact, SENEDIA came about in 2002 in anticipation of the 2005 BRAC. So to organize the industry so that we could work with government to really do the best we could to promote what Rhode Island has, show how important it was, and make sure we preserve it. An interesting fact is that Rhode Island became a net gainer in jobs out of the 2005 BRAC. Very significant. That doesn't often happen.
Absolutely. You know, there are big companies. You referenced a couple in my Electric Boat, Raytheon, but I remember when I was a tech reporter at Providence Business News, and there were all these small tech companies doing things with like barcodes, things you'd never expect, that all related to the military. Give people a sense of what the smaller scale firms are. Are there a lot of those?
There are. In fact, there's 400 companies in Rhode Island that do business with Department of Defense. That doesn't mean they do 100% of their business, but some piece of it. You mentioned barcoding. One of our member companies, A2B Tracking, down in Portsmouth.
That's the one I remember, yeah.
Yes. They do asset tracking, so that they've got these individual unit identification numbers, barcodes, that they can put on equipment. And so government, DOD, knows where that equipment is.
And that's
at any
each
point
piece, not the same one for every type.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Because it's a whole configuration management. We have another company called Applied Radar in North Kingston. They do a lot of work with radar technology. Secor, a company in Middletown, Rhode Island, they've done some neat research on using airbag technology to launch weapons. So yes, we have a wide range of companies. Banneker, they're really the leaders in logistic management, a supply chain help to companies that need to logistic support for their development efforts. We have
to take a break, but before we do, just one short question. How much do all these companies talk to each other? Do they meet up? There's your group. I mean, is there a significant community around, or are they all kind of doing their own thing in their own pods and just know that they're waiting for that check from the Pentagon?
Yeah, they do get together, and it's interesting. What we say is that times companies will be teammates on a proposal, and at other times they'll be competitors. But they all get together and network because, again, there's certain sharing of information that helps all companies, and you never know when you're going to need a company to be a teammate with you.
Absolutely. All right. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Molly about the defense sector in Rhode Island. Later, we're going to hear about a company that's expanding. We always like doing those interviews. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and we're talking right now. Later in the show, we're going to talk to Don Fox about his Burrowville company and how it's expanding, building a new facility. We're going to hear about that good news. But first, we're talking to Molly Donohue Magee about her group, SENEDIA. What does it stand for?
The Southeastern New England Defense Industry Alliance.
Why'd you use that acronym? It's awfully long.
I know. Bunch of engineers, we love acronyms, and so it's a tough name. I agree.
That's all right. Understood. But the defense, we're talking about the impact of defense on Rhode Island, the defense sector. And I want to talk about, we heard a lot, especially when the sequester was coming in, a lot of talk about it, a lot of alarms raised about the impact locally on these companies as well as the base and everything. How big an impact has the sequester had, and is it the biggest challenge facing this sector right now in this area?
It's a huge challenge. When it hit, and even the government shutdown was right in the same ballpark of the impact. For large companies, they could weather it. Suddenly you don't have income coming in, the contracts were delayed. For the majority of our companies, and the majority of companies in Rhode Island doing work for the defense industry, they're small companies. They have very short cash flow, and many of them had to furlough people. It bothered them significantly. As one manager said to me, I can plan if I know bad times are coming, and I can see that I'll do the right things. But when I have a shock that makes no sense that suddenly hits, it's very hard to plan in that environment. So very difficult time. As you know, we've sort of got a breathing area from sequester for another year. But that's still out there is what the impact of that could be again. It's very difficult on a business to operate in that environment.
And is it top of mind to these businesses, or is there heavy concern about that?
There absolutely is, especially the small businesses on the leading edge of research, development, technology, innovation. They want to keep their people. Certainly, they don't want to furlough somebody because they could leave. They could leave the area. We don't want workforce leaving the area. So it's ever present.
So SENEDIA, tell me a little, you mentioned the organization, I didn't actually know. It started during the last BRAC round to sort of defend Rhode Island, apparently successfully. But who are your members, all these different size companies, and what do you do for them?
A little bit about it. We are Southeastern New England, so we do have companies from Massachusetts through Rhode Island to Connecticut. Rhode Island has the most members. We have big companies, as I said, like Electric Boat and Raytheon, and very small companies. And what we do is we're a single voice for advocating for companies, so that we can be out there and talk about sequester so every company doesn't have to do it. We provide networking opportunities. One of our biggest ones was Defense Innovation Day. You had the lead-in.
Chuck Hagel, where he was speaking.
Which was pretty significant for us. That was an excellent opportunity for us to bring in our companies and let them talk to defense leaders and policymakers and really have a conversation of what technology they have, what DoD needs, and understanding the political environment of the defense budget.
I want to ask about Chuck Hagel. How did you get him to come, and what did you take away from his comments during those days?
Certainly, thank you, Senator Jack Reed, who is such an influence for our state and in defense overall. He was able to help us facilitate that invitation and make that happen. So very significant for us to get the Secretary of Defense here. Your lead-in comment was the one that we're all taking away and running with, which is Southeastern New England is the Silicon Valley of undersea warfare. A great line, but it's really true. We have Electric Boat that builds submarines, and then we have all these other companies. We've got Raytheon that builds other systems, and then companies that are on the forefront of technology, of concept operation. He also talked about the nexus of the Naval War College, the Naval Undersea Warfare Center, and industry, all within the state and the power they bring.
Yeah, and yeah, you mentioned Jack Reed. Obviously, my other hat is a political reporter. Jack Reed looks fairly strong for his re-election bid this year, and then if the Democrats hold the Senate, he's in line to become chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, a huge, important job in Washington. Do you think, I assume I know the answer, do you think that would have an impact on Rhode Island if Reed became the chair of Senate Armed Services?
That would certainly be very significant, but even his position as ranking member would be very significant. He is a well-respected defense person. He understands it from a policy perspective. We saw that with the comments that Chuck Hagel made relative to him. He also helped facilitate us bringing in the Undersecretary of Defense, Frank Kendall, another power leader within defense. So Jack Reed understands defense, is a real advocate, and understands it for us.
Yes, so it's not a campaign commercial. Jack Reed does fake face marks to carry in the fall. You can Google them both, decide who to vote for, but he's clearly been so active on this stuff. And before we go to a break, we're coming to the end of this segment, but we're taping this on the anniversary of 9/11, and we're now 13 years out from that, which is hard to believe. And spending on the military budget obviously has grown so much between 9/11, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. How significantly do you think the defense industry in Rhode Island and southern New England has changed since before 9/11 based on that influx of money and what's happened?
There are a lot of businesses that started right after 9/11 and sort of have grown in their technology and innovation and services. So that definitely has happened. But we're coming now to a period where the defense budget is stabilizing, and there's some folks who are pushing that it's time for the cycle to go down. So then that becomes a challenge of how you operate within that. One of the things we're promoting is how can we get our companies into non-DoD work as well as DoD work so we can mitigate that risk for them.
All right, that's all the time we have this second. Thank you so much, Molly Donohue Magee. We'll be keeping track of what SENEDIA is doing. If they keep that acronym, I'll try to get better at saying it by your next appearance on Executive Suite. Stay tuned, though. We're not done yet. We're having Don Fox come on to talk about his company expanding up in Burrillville. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and now we're joined by Don Fox. He is the president of Alashan Cashmere Co in Burrillville. First, the name, Alashan, where'd that come from?
It's a region of western Inner Mongolia that produces the world's finest cashmere and camel hair.
Have you ever been there?
I have.
What's it like?
Dry, remote, but the goats and the camels there produce a fleece that's unrivaled.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I've never been to Mongolia, I have to admit. Maybe Channel 12 will send me someday. Don, actually, last time you were here, you were a candidate for office. We were on Newsmakers doing a debate. That election unsuccessful, though I know you're running for town council now.
Correct.
Up from Burrillville. You guys can Google, find out who your candidates are up there in the town. But I want to talk today about your business, about Alashan Cashmere. First, obviously, cashmere kind of gives it away, but what do you do? What's this company? Why aren't you in Mongolia? What are you doing here in Burrillville?
Well, you know, we're predominantly a cashmere sweater and accessory producer. The bulk of our business is into the women's side, although we do have a men's line. We do produce throws for the home, and we still trade some raw materials to some niche manufacturers that are left in this country. But the bulk of our business, as I said, is women's sweaters, women's accessories. We sell to high-end boutiques around the country, across Canada and into Europe.
What's the history of the firm? How long has it been around?
We started in 2004. I originally got into the cashmere business in 1993. I was the general manager of a company out of Woonsocket, Rhode Island called Forte Cashmere. And my first job there was to manage the raw material production and sales. We would take the raw material from the goats, process it at one of our 3 plants, either in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, Verviers, Belgium, or in Ulaanbaatar, Outer Mongolia. And we would then sell that sort of semi-finished cashmere to spinners and knitters and weavers all around the world. At the same time, Forte had begun to import cashmere sweaters on their own. I worked there for 11 years. That company closed the owners closed it in 2004. I started my company right away out of the basement of my house in Pasco, Rhode Island.
You and your wife, right?
My wife and myself, right.
Dude, the classic entrepreneur story in the basement. It's obviously gone well because you're now getting ready to expand. You moved 2 times, I think, right?
Correct.
And you have a staff now, right?
We have a staff. Oh yeah, we have a staff. I hired my first staff. She joined me in my basement, and we then moved to. Funny enough, the place where we're putting up our new building, we moved to an office suite that was located right on site there. We had a third-party warehouse handling our logistics. We quickly realized that we would need to bring our own logistics and warehouse into the same building, and that's when we moved to our current location.
You know, being in the cashmere industry, there's been a lot of talk since the Great Recession, particularly, about consumer spending being down. People being a little more nervous about even, getting a nicer sweater, maybe get the cheaper sweater or something. Have you seen that kind of impact?
Absolutely, absolutely. There was a lot of pent-up demand after the 2008 crash. People became very conservative, although our business continued to thrive. We shifted gears. We work with some of the larger big box stores, and we're able to produce for them with their labels. That really helped us continue to grow our business while we brought our own brands online. So, but the core customer for our Claudia Nicole brand, yeah, they're ready to buy and they've been buying. And it's a testament to not only ourselves but our retailers, who have weathered the storm, figured out how to bring in new product, better product, more interesting product. And that's been happening all over the country. And also here in Rhode Island with some of our great retailers here.
So you're here today, you're talking about a new facility. This is up in Burrillville, people who know the area, next to Norfolk Power Equipment,
correct,
right?
Right on Broncos Highway.
Why'd you decide to build the new facility? Always a big decision for any company.
Certainly. I remember we moved into our current facility and I walked through our 3,000 square foot warehouse saying, how am I going to fill this place? We're now going to more than triple the size of our warehouse. We're going to triple the size of our office and design suite. And when we decided really to start looking to move, it was about 2 years ago. We started looking we looked in Woonsocket, North Smithfield, surrounding areas into Massachusetts. And it was really the Industrial Foundation of Burrillville had reached out to me during my last political campaign. We had touched on some business-related topics. They had reached out to me during the campaign, and I said, look, I want to talk to you guys when this campaign's done. And I did that, and I called them up, and we were able to...
Who is that, for people at home?
The Industrial Foundation of Burrillville is a quasi-private, quasi-public entity in Burrillville charged with developing businesses, providing them with assistance. They own different parcels of land. We were able to come to an agreement with the IFB for them to construct the building for us to our specifications, and we'll buy it turnkey from them. I have to say that we had fantastic support from the town of Burrillville. We looked all around the area, we looked across state lines, but really the town came together. We had bipartisan support for a tax treaty with the town of Burrillville. And actually, I'm very proud to have my business in the community where I'm raising my family. So for me, to be in Woonsocket or up somewhere in Massachusetts and have a 5 o'clock soccer game, it made the decision easier for me to keep it local. We have a lot of our staff is local Burrillville residents. On the other hand, we bring in some of our staff drives in from over an hour away to come to our company and work, some of our specialized people.
Now, did you look at your building right
We're
there,
building.
as you say? Did you consider going into an existing, or there's plenty of empty space in Rhode Island,
There is
sadly?
plenty of empty space, and we did look at it. We looked very carefully at a place in Lincoln where we would do perhaps a build out with inside the existing space. But you know, the work that we did with the town of Burrillville, that was the clincher for us. And they wanted to keep us in Burrillville, and we wanted to stay, and we were able to work out a deal to do that.
A few more questions on policy before we get that, though. Where any stores in Rhode Island people find your things?
Absolutely. You find the Ocean House down in Westerly, Galapagos Boutique, Angela Moore down in Newport. We have stores all over the Southern Shore area, stores in Providence.
Kind of stores my girlfriend likes to go.
Absolutely. And we encourage her to shop in those stores.
I'm sure please, not when it's her birthday, please. As I mentioned off the top, you've been a candidate for office before, you've mentioned that. We have constant conversations on the show. What can the state do? How can the economy in Rhode Island get better? Thinking about, and we should disclose you ran as a Republican, but as someone who owns your own business, is there low-hanging fruit you think the state could be doing that could make things easier for business folks?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, I mean, when I ran last time, I talked a lot about what makes us uncompetitive in New England. Sales tax, the elimination of the sales tax alone, you'd pull in thousands of shoppers just from Massachusetts. Our income tax, we look at states like New Hampshire with no sales tax, no personal income tax, and they've relatively weathered the storm relatively well over the last 6 or 7 years, 4 or 5% unemployment rate. Our unemployment rate, languishes. I mean, the defense industry, I was happy to listen to how well that industry has done and continues to do. But this is the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution, and we're a shell of our former self when it comes to certain industries. The leaders in the State House really need to look at all the mistakes they've made over the last 6 or 7 decades, realize that there are hard decisions to make, and those hard decisions involve taxation. I mean, what makes us, we're at the bottom of every major business ranking.
We only have about 30 seconds left, but how important is taxes as a business? Because sometimes you hear people say, in the end, taxes, they matter, but it's the workforce, it's this, it's that. How big is taxes when you think about
Well, I think it's important to our employees. If we want to hire better employees, if we want to attract businesses to Rhode Island, look, you've got me, I'm locked in here. But if we want to attract larger defense industries, let's say as an example, and they're looking at Massachusetts or Rhode Island or Connecticut, we need to set ourselves apart. And how do you do that? Well, you do it by making an attractive environment for the employees and for the owners, whether it's what they're paying in their personal income tax to the state or what they're paying on whatever they buy in the state.
All right, well, we'll leave it at that. We'll leave it with your stump speech. Don Fox, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
When do you think you'll be done with the project?
We're looking to take possession in December.
All right, in December, so I hope it works out for you before the snow is hit, and we're on non-stop coverage, always on Channel 12 when there's snow. So that's all the time we have. Molly, Don Fox, thank you very much for being here. Be sure to tune in next week. My guest will be the CEO of United Healthcare across New England, including Rhode Island, Stephen Farrell. Should be an interesting conversation as the Affordable Care Act prepares for its second open enrollment. If you missed any of this show or any other episode of Executive Suite, you can always catch all of those on our website, WPRI.com. Also your source for Campaign 2014. See you next week here on Executive Suite.